好榮幸喺朝頭早一個早餐會嗰度咧，聽到佢嘅演繹咧，我覺得係即係真係幫助到我哋了解基本法，係從一個律師嘅層面，唔係從一個我哋成日講嘅一個政界嘅政治人物嘅層面去了解基本法，而呢個了解咧係更加加深我哋將來了解香港嘅新聞，或者了解香港好多時候我哋有啲朋友從香港過嚟講一啲説話嗰陣時，究竟佢講嘅説話係有冇法理嘅根據呢？我相信我資深大律師呢，喺從呢方面呢，佢嘅講解可以幫助到大家，將來可以了解一下我哋香港嘅新聞究竟喺好多爭拗上面，究竟個法理嘅根據喺邊度呢？佢唔代表任何一個政黨，我知道佢最主要呢，就希望係從一個律師嘅角度去同大家分析一下香港基本法嘅問題。咁我唔想阻大家咁多嘅時間，我希望將呢個餘下嘅時間交俾胡律師。
我嚟嗰時個 program 咧，呢個環節咧就係一個 lunch。我入到嚟見到一個喜字，我以為有人結婚，一個婚宴，係嘛？咁原來咧係 no free lunch。咁咧佢話叫我講咧唔好講太耐，有啲人要趕住走。咁我同佢講咧，我話冇問題嘅，我哋啲做律師嘅人咧，尤其是成日上堂啲人咧，好唔習慣嗰啲不收費嘅談話。Anyway， 佢叫我咧就講咧用英語講，因為阿領事喺度咧，咁我啲普通話咧普通人聽唔明嘅。咁I'll go into the。
普通話非常好。
One date is 1984. Why 1984? Because 1984 is the signing of the Joint Declaration. And that arrangement resulted in Hong Kong's return to the PRC. 1984 is also a year I'm sure a lot of you here may remember or is a relevant date because as a result of 1984, a lot of people left Hong Kong. A lot of people left Hong Kong to come to Canada, to America, to Australia, some to Mauritius, all over the place. To leave Hong Kong, to flee from the incoming regime. My father left. He went to Vancouver. But this is the second time he left. He left in 1950 after 49. And to him, it was a very traumatic thing to have to leave again. Why were they leaving? They were leaving because they had no confidence in the PRC regime. And you must put it in context. 1984. 1984 is a time when China has just come out of the Cultural Revolution. It came out about 1976. So just a few years after that. It's not what China is like today. 1984 is also 2 years after the Falklands War. Do you remember 1982? Apart from being a good year for wine. 1984 is the year when the British government went to war over one colony called the Falklands, where there are about 2,500 people and maybe about 200 sheep in the middle of the South Atlantic to go to war against Argentina and won that war. And what was their excuse for going to war? Their excuse was that under the United Nations resolution, the people of a colony, even though Argentina exercised sovereignty or claimed sovereignty, has a right to self-determination. Right? So after that war, the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was very confident of her position, and in 1983, in the same year, 1982, she went to visit Beijing. The talks were not successful, and you may remember the image of her coming out of the Great Hall and falling down the steps. But the Hong Kong dollar fell even more. 1982, it fell to $10. At that time. 1982 is another significant date because that was the year when the Chinese constitution was amended. I'm sure none of you knew that. It's a big amendment to the Chinese constitution, a very big amendment. A lot of it was overhauled. One of the most important amendments is Article 31. Article 31 is an important amendment because the Chinese constitution prescribes that there's only one system in the whole of China, and that is a socialist system under the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party. It has no room, it cannot accommodate any other system. And in fact, the dogma at that time was to push the revolution, like the Americans push democracy around the world. Everybody has a mission statement. But in 1982, the Chinese leadership, particularly Mr. Deng Xiaoping, has already made a strategic decision that the only way to unify China, and at that time, there are three areas which are not under Chinese sovereignty: Hong Kong, Macau, and the breakaway province of Taiwan. And to the leadership in China, reunification is the number one priority. And the only way to achieve that is through a very innovative formula: one country, two systems, to accommodate the opposite system, the capitalist system. Now, that formula was put into effect by amending the Chinese constitution to allow the central government to establish what we call SAR, Special Administrative Regions, which can enjoy a different system. The target at that time was primarily Taiwan, but the same formula was used in discussions with the British government. In 1983, the discussions commenced between Britain and China. The British position was very simple. They want an extension of the lease. They want life to continue. They want the price of real estate to continue rising. That was not to be. At the end of the day, the Chinese government persuaded the British government that A, they have to return sovereignty at the end of the lease. And the formula is to allow Hong Kong society to continue as before for at least 50 years. You remember all this? And the British government, on the other hand, felt that they had no option. Do you think they would go to war with China to keep Hong Kong like the Falklands? No. So, as the then Foreign Secretary, Sir Geoffrey Howe, said to the people of Hong Kong, he said this is the only option to the British government. But they tried to make the best of it, which is to make sure that China means one country, two systems. Now, the first problem is you have to define the system. The last thing you want is, well, you know, the two systems blur. And then you say that, well, nothing has really changed. So at that time, the formula was called to take a snapshot of Hong Kong, a picture of Hong Kong in 1984, that everything will remain the same. How do you take that picture? Very simple. You take Hong Kong's societal structure and you break it down into building blocks, and you force the Chinese government to declare a policy. It's called a basic policy, 基本方针政策, and to make sure that that policy explains, so there can be no argument in the future to say, well, you've changed it, I haven't changed it. Right? And that's why ultimately it's called a basic law. Where did the word basic come from? Basic policies. Right? So what you have is that the legal system has a basic policy, the monetary system has a basic policy, the transportation system, the education, everything has a basic policy. Okay? So all these basic policies are then mentioned in the Joint Declaration. And in Annex 1 of the Joint Declaration, it elaborates the basic policies further. By the end of 1983, they decided that they have come into a consensus that they can actually sign an agreement called the Joint Declaration. But the basic policies on everything in detail hasn't been worked out. So they formed a group called the Joint Liaison Group, the JLG. And that went on from 1984 to the year 2000, even past 1997 to the year 2000. One of the examples of a basic policy, which is a relevant subject to you all here, involves an interpretation by China after the handover of Hong Kong, Sikfa. That deals with the right of abode, 居港權. During the discussions of the JLG, the British government was very concerned that after the handover, mainland China will allow a lot of mainland Chinese to come into Hong Kong. Right? And our systems, our facilities will not be able to tolerate this. This is, of course, you have to remember, you're still talking about a China in the 80s, not today's China, which is vibrant, a leader in the world economy. This is a time when we call them abiu, that we really look down on our mainland compatriots. That the British government was very concerned that large numbers of them were coming to Hong Kong. So they wanted the Chinese to declare a basic policy, not about Hong Kong people having a right of abode in Hong Kong, about what sort of mainland people can come to live in Hong Kong. So the Chinese government says, what is your suggestion? I said, well, why don't you define it by law? In the English Immigration Act, there is a definition, a term called the right of abode. It's in the English Immigration Act. Why don't you take that? Fine, says the Chinese government. And then have a set of legal criteria. Single parent, whatever criteria that is. And the net result was less than 100,000 people at most, who have such an eligibility. So this was, according to JLG records, an express request by the British government to address a fear that they have of flooding of mainland refugees coming to Hong Kong. So under the colonial regime, and when Frank Wong was still in the legal department, Tony Yan wrote the law, drafted the law. Immigration ordinance has a right of abode concerning mainland people who can come. After the handover, the basic law came to effect, and some mainland people thought, well, challenge it. Right? Judicial review. Frank, this is a new industry. Judicial review. 司法覆核. Really a new industry in Hong Kong. Judicial review. Took it to court. Went all the way up to the Court of Final Appeal. Right? And the Hong Kong government said, but this is beyond your jurisdiction. Right? Because the jurisdiction of the Hong Kong courts comes from the central government. It's delegated. Right? Because right? And then they have to delegate it down. Because Hong Kong under the basic law is 直屬直轄於中央人民政府，係地方政府。But high degree of autonomy. Okay. So they said to the Court of Final Appeal that this is a matter beyond the autonomy of Hong Kong, 係自治範圍以外嘅事，right? Because it involves mainland people, mainland policy, because 佢有人口管制嘅。People in mainland China then can't move so freely. Right? They can't even go to Shenzhen, right? Because there's demographic control. And for them to allow people to come to Hong Kong is a matter beyond our autonomy. Court of Final Appeal disagreed. Then the Hong Kong government says, well, if you're going to interpret it, then interpret it in accordance with the true intent behind the basic law, the legislative intent. And the intent is the JLG agreement. It is to address a British concern, which is in as part of the Joint Declaration as the JLG agreement, right? And which, under the basic law, any amendment of this law cannot contravene the basic policies. Right? So, ignored. A new interpretation came out, and the Hong Kong government's calculation was about 1.3 million people was eligible to come. A lot of people said that, oh, they're exaggerating. Hong Kong government exaggerates. 10 years down the road, do you think it's an exaggeration? In the last year, we have a lot of mainland wives coming to give birth in Hong Kong. A lot. We're talking about a figure, hospital authority now have to charge. 6萬蚊, 7萬蚊, they still come. But that's a different story. The reason why they came is because of the one-child policy. Right? Because if you have more than one child, you get penalized. No facilities to come to Hong Kong. Right? That's another story. Just to put it in context, 1.3 million people. But the more important point was that this meant that China is in breach of the Joint Declaration, a basic policy. Because they agreed with the British government that only a very small percentage of mainland people can come to Hong Kong. Okay. So then what happened? 6 5. They interpreted the basic law. And as a result, the Court of Final Appeal, having reconsidered the matter, felt that they were wrong. Right? It was a matter beyond their autonomy, and a clarification was issued by the Court of Final Appeal. Very unusual for a court, not in the course of a case, to issue a public statement, a clarification that they were wrong. But that's the legal side. The political side was this caused huge controversy in Hong Kong. People took to the streets, right? People 遊行, 釋法. 釋法 is against the separation of powers. 釋法 erodes our autonomy, right? Because in Hong Kong, we believe that we are like England, Canada, America, where there's separation of powers. When you talk about separation of powers, you're really talking about separation of the judiciary from the other two. Very rarely do you have a separation of the three. The English system, and I think the Canadian system is a bit like that, the Westminster system, you only get to vote for one person, your MP. You don't get to vote for the Prime Minister. Right? Because it's the MPs who have the largest vote, the majority who forms the government. And it depends who is the, in Japan it changes every month, who's the head of the, right? In England now we've got Mr. Brown or Mr. Blair, right? The voters were not involved. Right? In America it's different. You vote for the president, you vote for your congressman, you vote for your senator, you can even vote for your judge. It's a very different system, right? And that's the first point I wish to make. Understand what you're talking about before you start, going out shouting slogans. Right? What is the system? Now, so they say, oh, this is all my friends at the bar, Audrey, Ronnie Tong, my pupil Alan Leung. Oh, this is bad. This is bad. How can you interpret? I said, very simple. Because if you look at the Chinese constitution, the system in China is the opposite. It's called a unitary system. 單一制. It's actually a very supreme form of parliamentary system. There's only one organ of power under the constitution. 人民,全國人民代表大會, the MPC. Whether the Communist Party controls it, that's another different matter. I'm talking as a lawyer, right? That is the organ. Right? And that organ produces the government, 國務院, the State Council. And it produces the Supreme People's Court. And it also produces the Supreme People's Procuratorate. So 叫做一府兩院. And so when you go every year to the 開兩會, the MPC and the CPPC, when they go for the annual meeting, you hear work reports from the State Council, 國務院, through the Premier, gives a work report. And then 肖揚, 全國人民會, 高院法官 gives their work report. And then the Procuratorate, 假院長, gives his. It's a very different system. They are created by Parliament and are accountable by Parliament. And the laws that get interpreted in China has different interpretation. 有行政釋法, right? An administrative unit can interpret the law. Because the laws in China are drafted in the old days. It's like painting with a broad brush. 係唔同一個 culture. Why? So you don't have to keep amending it. 所以咪成日都要解釋啦，點樣攞到批文啊？So they have administrative interpretation, they have judicial interpretation, But the highest interpretation is the MPC interpretation. Okay? So that's the first point. It's a unitary system. Right? This is within the Chinese constitution. The second thing is, a lot of people don't realize this. It's too heavy, always carrying these things. This is the joint declaration. Right? This is the idea. And this is the instrument, the basic law. Right? The system in China is that when you pass a law, you have a right constantly not just to amend it, but also to interpret it. And in Hong Kong, they are very opposed to this idea. So I was talking, I won't name names, but to one of the persons I knew in the now the Civic Party. I said, let's take your argument that China is not a unitary state. Separation of powers, just like America. Let's take that example, all right? You must accept point number one. Hong Kong is just a 地方政府, right? A subsidiary government. Yes, accept that. Number two, that this law, the basic law, a lot of people don't realize this. It's a national law. It's not just a law for Hong Kong. It's passed by the MPC for the whole country. 每一個省市都要尊重. And I'll tell you why later. It's a national law. So, who should interpret it under the separation of powers? The Supreme People's Court. Right? How can it be a 地方政府嘅法院去 interpret a law for the whole of China binding 其他省市? That's nonsense. Right? 講到要冇大冇細. Right? Can't be right. So there's no, what I'm saying, there's no intellectual honesty in your argument. Right? Start with the basic groundwork. Start with the right issues. I'm not here to preach political sort of thinking one way or the other. My mission is, let's call a spade a spade. Find out what you're talking about first. That's one example of Sikfa. Another example, to be topical, is Article 23. Right? Article 23 is like a dirty word. National security legislation. Every country in the world has it. It is a matter of the exercise and protection of sovereignty. Under the British Empire, a lot of colonies became independent. The only colony that did not become independent is Hong Kong. We are the only colony which is not part of the British Commonwealth anymore, because we are now part of China. But in all the countries, all the colonies that became independent, right, the minute they gained statehood, sovereignty, one of the things they must pass is national security legislation, right, to protect your territory. Right? First you declare how big my territory is. 領空, right? 海域, which is my capital city. What are the symbols of my country? The national anthem, flag, right? And national security legislation. And these types of legislation are in the basic law, in Annex 3. Right? In Annex 3, I don't know if you, I'm sure the ETO has brought copies of basic law for you to take home free. Annex 3 says national laws to be applied to the Hong Kong SAR. Okay? And these deals with the things I've just said. Right? Now, national security legislation is always, in every country in the world, there's only one set. One country, two systems. China wasn't the first. Canada is the first, because of Quebec. In Quebec, you have a completely different culture, French. Different language, French. Different legal system, French continental system. Not like in Vancouver, not like anywhere else in Canada. But in Quebec, do you have national security legislation separate from the rest of Canada, passed under a continental legal system? No, because common sense dictates it doesn't make sense. How can one behavior amount to treason in one part of the country and not in another part of the country? Right? It doesn't make sense. But in the 80s, I was the Hong Kong Bar Association's chairman on the drafting of the basic law, right, after the joint declaration. I went to England and I tried to convince the British Foreign Office to argue a case with the Chinese government to allow Hong Kong to have not their national security legislation, not the mainland national security legislation, but to pass them under our common law definition. Very difficult to do, right? But I said, it can be done. Not because of jurisprudential reasoning, but because of one political trump card that we have. And that trump card is called Taiwan. The biggest object of the unification of China is Taiwan. Because it's not just a place where some country took it as a colony, because it is in international law in a state of civil war with China. It calls itself also a Republic of China. Right? Although now it's trying to call itself Formosa. Right? And the point is this, that I said that to the Foreign Office, I said, it's very difficult for Hong Kong people, that's the other reason I said you can put forward, to accept national security legislation in the mainland. You get offenses like counter-revolutionary offenses. What's that? We have offenses called subversion, 反颠覆. What is that? Just to speak ill against your government? That's subversion, that kind. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the Foreign Office tried and was successful. So the Chinese government agreed that Hong Kong people can have our own version of national security legislation, passed under common law principles, and it became Article 23. I thanked the Foreign Office. I said, this is very precious, right? It's a very precious right. And when it became law, I was very happy. We're now 10 years down the road. Have we passed it? No. Okay. 500,000 people in Hong Kong took to the streets. They have a sign saying, anti-Article 23. Again, I said to my colleagues in the Civic Party, do you know what you're saying? If you're against the Hong Kong government's proposal, then say so. But why do you want to say anti-Article 23? Because if you say anti-Article 23, the central government hears you and say, fine, abolish it, right? And then our legislation will come in, and then people like Falun Gong will disappear from Hong Kong, correct? At the moment, Falun Gong is banned, very much banned in the mainland. They operate openly in Hong Kong, with all protection. They can go to court, get judicial review. They can organize themselves. Right? They can sit outside a joint liaison office. Nobody bothers them. Hey, that's a reality. And we still don't have that legislation. How long do you think the central government will wait? So the theme of my talk today is very simple. The theme of my talk today is that I believe, and I can tell you, I'm much more westernized than a lot of you. And I can tell you that the Chinese government has shown credibility, right? And they have shown good faith to one country, two systems. Right? And they are abiding by the basic law. Why? Taiwan. Right? If they don't, when will Taiwan come back? They've already said it has to be one country, two systems for Taiwan as well. So the danger is when you have politicians in Hong Kong who are only concerned with political objectives and not the objectives of the society of Hong Kong as a whole, right? And you pick fights with the central government, you demonize the central government, right? Then what will happen? I said it, I said it to Martin Lee. I said, the way you treat the central government is like the way you treat Lord Greystoke. Now, you may not understand or recognize Lord Greystoke. In Hollywood terms, Lord Greystoke is called Tarzan. Right? Remember that this was a man born into an aristocratic family in England. Right? The story was he went to Africa, the parents lost him, was brought up by chimps, became an animal, then he returned to England, they rediscovered him, and he tried to behave like a human being. That's in a way China's like that when he came out of the Cultural Revolution. It was a big blow to Chinese civilization, the Cultural Revolution. And then China came out. China learned its lesson. So when Tarzan, Lord Greystoke, sat down on the dinner table in a dinner jacket, right, and combed his hair, and if you suddenly wallop him and hit him because he has dirty fingernails, what would he do? He might well go back to the jungle. Shouldn't you do the better thing to encourage the person, to encourage the country and say, you're going the right way, nice suit, I like the glasses, next time clean the fingernails. Right? That's the way to go. China today, what sort of face is China today? Does it practice capitalism or does it practice communism? What do you think? It practices socialism with Chinese characteristics. It joins WTO. Right? Its currency will be convertible very soon, I promise you. The renminbi is worth more than the Hong Kong dollar. Most of our people are going north to work. What we need to achieve for Hong Kong to survive is to plug in to China's prosperity. Right? Do you think we can survive on our own? Look at the last 10 years. Asian financial crisis, SARS. We couldn't do it. We have to go to China and say, help us, Ji Yao Han. Let people come down and spend renminbi here. Just put money in my pocket. China did that. Not enough. China did more. What did it do? One of our problems was our Hong Kong dollar, because it was pegged to the US dollar politically. It was pegged politically, which offends all economic principles. Nowhere else in the world can you peg a currency for political concerns to say it will always be $1 US to 1.78 Hong Kong dollars, or to 7.8 Hong Kong dollars. Nobody will buy that. Then of course that would happen in financial crisis. People like Soros attack the Hong Kong dollar. And our oxygen is foreign investment, foreign money. Right? The second thing was the US dollar was very high then. We were not competitive. Right? Mr. Tung then went through asset depreciation, took 10% away from Posani's salary and all civil servants. No rent increases. It didn't work. It didn't work. Why did Hong Kong recover recently? Because the central government backed the Hong Kong dollar by making the renminbi convertible in Hong Kong only. So if the international world thinks that the Hong Kong dollar is overpriced, but they think the renminbi is underpriced, right? The US government say, please put it up, put it up. They back the Hong Kong dollar in Hong Kong. And the other reason, of course, because the US dollar is low. Now the Canadian dollar is the same as the US dollar. I went to change some yesterday. If I'm selling, it's 9.9 something. If I'm buying, it's 1.0 something. Basically, it's at a par. Right? So basically, that helped us, the recent recovery. But the recent recovery is still just hot money. Right? Just money coming in to Hong Kong. We still haven't worked out our basic structure. What is our basic structure? It's not Disneyland. It's not Cyberport. Our basic structure is that we are the financial center. Right? We were, before the handover, the number 3 financial center in the world. 2 years ago, I rang the government and said, where are we now? Number 7. Now I don't even want to know. Right? Now, how do we maintain that? Funny enough, this. Because the basic law says that Hong Kong is to be a Chinese international financial center of our country. That means every part of China has to comply with it. And that's why I say to Shanghai, don't call yourself a financial center. You don't want to breach the basic law. You can call yourself a commercial center. Shanghai did that. For 9 years, they never called themselves a financial center until last year. When they came to Hong Kong, they said, we want to be a financial center. I said, that's wrong. And our chief executive now, Donald Tsang, is getting the right track. He's going out pushing Hong Kong is a financial center. The other examples, Hong Kong's aviation hub. I'll give you an example of my last example. 2 years ago, I was asked by Cathay Pacific, Dragonair, and the Hong Kong Airport Authority to do a Taiwan. This is what we do in Jinkin, to do a Taiwan, the central government. Why? Because after the handover, in 20 nautical miles in Hong Kong, there are 5 international airports. Hong Kong, Zhuhai, Auckland, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, 5 in 20 nautical miles. But not one coordinated air traffic control. Everybody fighting, ignoring the other one. Right? So that's why even I didn't know until I was told by the airport authority, our second runway is underused. Just can't get them off in the sky. Now in Western Europe, you have a very small territory in terms of 土地面積. You have a lot of countries, Luxembourg, whatever. There are a lot of international airports, but there's always a coordinating, Frankfurt, right? Coordinating hub. So Hong Kong says, let there be a coordinating hub. Another thing you don't realize, and I will invite you when you go back to Hong Kong, when you fly out of Hong Kong, nowadays on the back of the seat in front of you, there is a screen that tells you how many miles to your destination. I flew to London in July, it says 5,900 kilometers. After we took off, for 20 minutes, it's 6,000 something. I said, we're going in the wrong direction. No. What happened was that before the handover, there is what's called a China Wall in terms of the PLA Air Force, which one of the 8 regions is the Guangdong military region. They never changed that after that. So, which means you can't fly, even though we are now part of China, into Chinese airspace. You have to fly out to sea. They only allow flyovers, overflights. We have to go out and reach 25,000 feet, turn around, and then fly over. That's half an hour of fuel, carbon signature, money, time. Makes nonsense. Taiwan. They're looking at it. This example of the story is to say, I said, you are breaching the basic law in 2 ways. One, you are not treating Hong Kong as part of China. Are we expendable? Are we beyond the protection of the PLA? That's number one. Number two, we are the aviation hub. It's in the basic law. Right? So tell Guangzhou, tell Shenzhen, tell Zhuhai, come on. We are the aviation hub. Treat us like Frankfurt. Right? We've got the know-how and the networking. Right? Of course, now economics come into play. As you all know now, there's a lot of incestuous crossbreeding now. China Airline owns that much of Cathay, Cathay owns that much of Dragonair. It's all now basically coming together. But the point I'm making is that in order for one country, 2 systems to really work, we all have to give it life. I'm trying to show that even the Chinese government have never thought of it. Right? See the China Wall. So you're right. When I argue, I said you're right. Another example for lawyers. The organization in China is called All China Lawyers Association, 全國律協. When they go out to Fongman, I said, can I be part of delegation? No. Can a Macau lawyer be part of delegation? No. It goes out, Qing Asik, all mainland lawyers. I said, that breaks the law, the basic law. You're going out showing one country, one system. In the Olympics in 2008, they appointed 2 law firms to be honorary legal law firms. One is called King & Wood, the largest law firm in Beijing. The second one is an American law firm. I'd be joking. Common law, why not Hong Kong law firm? Why an American law firm? Again, one country, one system. And I make that comment to Law Ho Choi, who's the vice chairman of Jinkin. He said, I agree with you. So as of last year, we're now observers in the All China Lawyers Association. See, all the mindset has to change. Right? Because one country, 2 systems was a political and diplomatic formula that worked. It 解決咗, right? It 解決咗香港回歸問題. It solved it. But the next problem arises. This is now a constitution. There's no learning. There's no experience. The American federal system's gone for 200 years. It's still evolving. Right? So how do you want to deal with one country, 2 system? 一國係虛定實嘅？係淨係唱話國歌、升國旗 That's it? Or is it something real that you want? All we're doing in Hong Kong is emphasizing the difference between the two systems. I think that the right formula is that you have to 爭取一國之下最大嘅優惠 ，at the same time 強調兩制之間最大嘅分別 ，i.e. the best of both worlds. My society in Hong Kong, you can't touch. I continue as before. But whatever benefit I have under one country, I want. Right? Isn't that the right way to go? But in order for that to happen, you must have a normal relationship with the central government. Right? 即係我哋中文叫父子關係咧。You have to have a regular relationship and recognize it. And what's happening in Hong Kong is that is not happening. Right? We're not having a proper relationship between the central government and the Hong Kong government. And this, at this stage, 10 years down the road, I feel sad because we're now coming to a point which is critical. A lot of my friends, apart from those who make money like Franks, come to Canada. All of them are going to Shanghai, to Beijing, to Tianjin. A lot of opportunities to Hainan Island, you know. And if we don't plug in, where we have a right to plug in, we'll be left behind. So I hope that all of you here in Canada will also help, right? Because on the international stage, the international perception of Hong Kong is important as well. When people, I just came back from Washington, when people like the State Department of America criticize 一國兩制, when they don't understand it, when the British government criticizes it, you know, it does us a lot of damage. And because why? Because if the central government is credible, 係有誠意嘅，係有誠信嘅, and you undermine it, what's going to happen? Right? Then the only thing is that it will not be the carrot, it will be the stick that comes out, right? And then we suffer. So I think that we really owe it to ourselves as part of Hong Kong, even if you're living here, right? To understand. All I'm asking you to do is just understand the situation. Find out what the issues are. You know, when people march in the streets, when my friends in the Civic Party says, 反釋法, and I said, what do you mean by 反釋法? They said, no, actually it's not 反釋法, I mean, 我反對香港政府提交咗嘅釋法. It's a technical objection. 話香港政府冇權提交，但中央可以釋法. Then say so. Don't say 反釋法. Right? If you are against the 香港政府 formula, say that, but don't say anti-Article 23, because you're giving all the wrong messages to China and the rest of the world. It's amazing. I've never spoken so long with an unpaid speech.
You study at the Singapore College, Boys College, is that right? So I'm also a Singapore Boys College alumnus. He's also Peter Low is also alumnus of Singapore College. We are powerful. Okay. The second question is, your talk is very enlightening on basic law. But then how long will the basic law of the one country, two systems will last? Will it last after the 50 years? Or will it continue, or will it stop at the 50 years from 1997?
Well, the first question was a compliment to both you and me, listening Singapore boys. I'd like to add, all the political figures in Hong Kong, a lot of them are Singapore boys. Zhang Yuxing, Zheng Deqing, Li Wingdan, you know, Yip Shi Kun, all from Singapore boys. The second question, how long would it last? Well, the answer is this. How long would the difference between the two systems last? Now, one of the most important basic policy that the British government insisted on was that Hong Kong shall keep its existing capitalist system, 原有的資本主義社會不改. That means even if all 7 million people in Hong Kong wants to have communism, you can't have it, right? Because that's the bargain the British government imposed, right? We can't change it. If we can change it, then it becomes bad because there's no protection under the Joint Declaration. So, if you look at China now, what's the difference between their society and our society? Some people think it's very capitalistic. More capitalistic than Hong Kong. The official representative is put in a British position. He can't pass any comments. At the moment, a lot of people now, right? What it is that it is a one-party system. It's like in Singapore. There's no doctrine. There's no dogma anymore. So, and that I think is basically Deng Xiaoping's point. Why did he pick 50 years? You know, I always think about this. The British, I never understood why 99 years, Hong Kong. Why not 100? There's some superstition, 99. You know, 點解唔100年？好奇怪。But anyway, so 50 years. But I think with Deng Xiaoping, 50 years, because he says at least 50 years. He didn't say will only last for 50 years. He says at least for 50 years. I think he has vision. I think he thinks in the long run because he's already opening up China. Right? We are part of WTO. We are in a marketplace. We're going. You go to the moon. We go to the moon. Right? We are playing the Western game. Right? Look at the laws being passed by the NPC now because of WTO. A lot of it are Western laws, common law laws, in order for WTO to work. So basically, he's seeing that the two systems will naturally come together. Right? You have to depend on each other. Right? And I think that it's coming earlier than we think. 10年啫嘛，回歸 another 40 years to go. I bet you in another 40 years' time, if we're all still here, that you don't need to ask this question. In fact, if you look at Macau now, they're already practicing the mainland system. I speak to lawyers there. They don't want a Portuguese system, ecclesiastical law. You know, they don't want that thing. They want the mainland system. It's a functional system. So the answer to your question is, I don't think that time is the material thing. Right? It's basically that the two societies are evolving in such a way that we're now talking about a global picture. Everything is global economy. And I think that Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Macau, in time, will enjoy, I hope, what I call economic 即經濟一體化. Right? Because under WTO, there's something that we can achieve. That's another. The then ruling party when Taiwan broke away was KMT, Kuomintang. Would it surprise you to know that Kuomintang is a legitimate organization in China? That they still have a minority party called Kuomintang. And what I'm saying to you is that if you can secure enough votes in the NPC, why not? You know, you can come back into the mainland. But the larger picture, I think, is the economic picture because I won't say your because I don't know which party you subscribe to. Conservative. So that means 藍營係咪 ？Blue. Now, your leader, Lin Jin, when he went to Beijing 2 years ago, you know what he said when he landed? He says we must promote a common market. Right? Remember that? 共同市場. Now, he wouldn't say this if he hasn't, the Cantonese expression is 摸咗底嘅. Right? That this is something which the mainland government is also keen on. Because that is a subject which I've been involved with. I'm on the Strategic Commission in the Hong Kong government now. We were talking about WTO. In the run-up to 1997, I was working for a definition, again from the Canadian experience, of the definition of a China lawyer. As I said, in Canada, you have two types of lawyers. You have French lawyers in Quebec, you have English lawyers in Vancouver, but they're both Canadian lawyers, right? They can practice under one roof, okay? At the moment, I can't practice with mainland lawyers or Macau lawyers. But at the moment, our country has three of the largest legal systems in the world. Common law system in Hong Kong, European continental system in Macau, and the mainland system because of the number, the size of our country. The three largest systems. But at the moment, we can't practice under one roof. So I went to the Ministry of Justice for 2 years as the bar's representative together with Zhao Wenqi for the solicitors to ask for a definition of China lawyer, like in Canada, Canadian lawyer. Right? And in 1999, the Ministry of Justice says yes. And then Fu Bozheng, Dun Jinghuan, came to Hong Kong to the City Hall and announced there's a new system of China lawyer, 中國律師, and there'll be three categories, 中國律師香港法, 中國律師澳門法, 中國律師大陸法, right? Because of the content, obviously. Right? I was happy, but my pleasure was short-lived for a few months Because in the end of 1999, China has signed to join WTO. And at that time, it's now called 商務部, at that time 叫外經貿局. And they looked at WTO and said, can't happen. Ministry of Justice scrapped the whole idea. Why? Because under WTO, you don't look at sovereign borders. You look at 分開關稅區. It's the first time in WTO that one country, China, has 4 different customs territory. Hong Kong, Macau, mainland, and Taiwan. Separate. Okay? Separate membership. And under WTO, so if you look at the map of WTO, China has 4 different colors. Okay? And under Article 5 of WTO, the whole idea about WTO is most favored nation clause. 最優惠國家待遇. i.e., if you join the club, you become a most favored nation. And anything, any privilege that one member state gives to another member state automatically goes to everybody else because everybody's most favored. So i.e., if they went along with my idea, not only can Hong Kong lawyers become China lawyers, but also American lawyers and European Union lawyers, because they're all members of WTO. Right? But then I went away, and my characters, I don't give up. So I went then, instead of seeing the Ministry of Justice, I started going to Waiking Moko and find out more about this. I said, oh, no, that's not so. I said, at that time, in the year 2000, there were only 50 members of the European Union. Each of them is a member of the WTO. So I said, you're right. If England gives France any agricultural benefit, it has to give to America, right? Because they're all WTO. So European Union will cease to exist. They have dual membership. Dual membership, what's that? 15 countries have 16 membership, one collective membership, and then individual membership. 雙贏. What you don't want to give away, you argue under that. You go under that. What you want to take, you use the other one. So I said, how did that happen? Article 8. So what's Article 8 of the Charter? Promotion of regional integrity. 促進a region. 第一 region, 而家 European Union 26個國家，已經去到土耳其嘅。That's what I thought was called Asia Minor. That's not Europe, but it's expanding. Okay? So I said, well, what about the principle of promotion of sovereign integrity? 一國兩制. Doable, says WTO. Right? I then went to Joaquin Marco. I said, I've been told by WTO it's doable. Yes, we agree. We know it's doable. Too late. Our membership just been approved. We have to resubmit it. China will be put back by at least 7 years to join WTO. We can't have that. Number 2, if you want this to happen, the Hong Kong SAR government must make out a case of dual membership. Okay? I then went back to Hong Kong and reported to the then Financial Secretary, Sir Donald Tsang. I said, this is what they say. 等佢入世先，入完之後 they will look after us. Okay. So after China joined WTO, Donald Tsang went up to Beijing. You may remember he asked for 自由貿易區, like North America, free trade zone. But Beijing says no, CEPA is all you get. Right? And there's another long story I'll tell you about CEPA on another occasion. But what I'm saying is that the short answer to your question is that this is now something which is actively looked at by both the Taiwan people, your party, by the mainland, by Hong Kong, and also by Macau, because that certainty is good for us if we can have dual membership of the WTO. Right? And all you need is what Beijing is saying to Taiwan. All you need is 承認你係一個，即係叫聲老豆。And then you can have all the benefits you want. And I think the future, I believe Taiwan one day will reunite. And I think it will first happen with a 經濟一體化. I always believe economics dictates politics. Not just diplomacy, not just military maneuvers, but economics. Okay? Thank you.
Fighting on behalf of the legal integrity in Hong Kong. And on the other hand, we find that the AG, Liang Ngoi-si, is touring the pro-China line. Can you assess the future in case, say, something like that will happen? Since now we have Wang Yanlong now instead of Liang Ngoi-si.
Well, Andrew Lee is an extremely good lawyer and a good friend of mine. And basically, he has a different perception of my country's existence. Right? His perception is that okay, let me cut to the chase. The basic argument between lawyers from one country to systems is this. You remember that this year, the 10th anniversary of Hong Kong's handover, there was a big ceremony in Beijing, in the Yaman Dawudong. And the Yan Dawei Yingzhe, the second most senior person in China, Wang Gong, said that a lot of people in Hong Kong are mistaken about Yagorante. They think that there is what's called residual power. Okay? Now, he has put his finger on the problem. A lot of lawyers look at this document, so the joint declaration, and you will see it says that apart from defense and foreign affairs, Hong Kong will enjoy a high degree of autonomy. Now, think about that sentence. Apart from defense and foreign affairs, Hong Kong will enjoy a high degree of autonomy. There are two ways of interpreting it. The first way is to say, in this room, apart from these two teapots, everything belongs to me. Right? That's one interpretation. Apart from these two matters, the rest is all my power, residual power. That's one interpretation. It's a wrong interpretation. The second interpretation, if you read it carefully, it says, apart from defense and foreign affairs, which are not matters that concerns you, right? Foreign affairs of China, how can that concern you? If a state of war exists with a particular country, how can Hong Kong argue with that? That's the country's position, right? Apart from these two matters, the rest, you will enjoy a high degree of autonomy. Do you see what I'm saying now? So that what remains is subject to a high degree of autonomy, not absolute autonomy. And what are the restrictions for that? Two things. Acts of state, sovereign exercise of power, appointment of chief executive, appointment of Juyu Gunyun, act of state, must be sovereign power. And the second one is keeping the promises of the joint declaration, i.e. Baguan, all the basic policies you have to adhere to. Right? So you see now the argument. Andrew Lee belongs to the first camp. You can't blame him. He thinks, so CFA being the US Supreme Court, that's what he's trying to do. Right? But he knows that that's not the right interpretation now, because he issued a clarification. Right? So it's not, what I don't like about sort of perceptions like this, that people are trying to build confrontation. Everybody in Hong Kong, whether it's the Civic Party, Democratic Party, whether it's Wang Yanlong, whether it's me or other people, I think that everybody has a common objective. They do want the best for Hong Kong. But people have different ideas. Right? That's what a democratic society is about. Right? Coexistence. Right? But don't pitch them against each other. Why always pick a fight? Right? Be constructive. We've been fighting in Hong Kong for 10 years. Where are we now? What have we achieved in the last 10 years? I tell you, the only thing we have done is we are the only IPO capital at the moment. That's because of state enterprises coming to Hong Kong to list their companies. And I fear one day, when renminbi becomes convertible, they won't come to Hong Kong. We don't have that much renminbi. So look forward, plug in, make one country, two system work. Right? Plug into the system. Forget about the squabbles. Don't talk about personalities, being personal. They got now more and no so on. Right? You get far being here. Right? 主流思想啦。
I think this will be the very last question.
I have enjoyed your speech. You have given us a broader understanding of basic law. Your speech had reflect the sentiment of Hong Kong people. That is, to have a cake and eat it as well. The question I have, as a Hong Kong person, what do you perceive as a duty to the country? As one country, two systems, do you have a duty or obligation to serve the country that take Hong Kong back? I have not heard anything that Hong Kong people should have a duty to help our country to prosper.
That's a very good lawyer's question, because the duties are very simple. The duties are very simple. The basic law, if you look through it, duty. It's all enjoyment. You enjoy this right, you enjoy that right, because that sets the difference between the two systems. Right? So that is our cake. Our duties lie in the Chinese Constitution. But not the whole of the Chinese Constitution applies to us. Right? The socialist part doesn't apply to us. The parts that apply to us are really the basics of sovereign existence, i.e. We have to respect national security. We have to respect symbols of state. Okay? Put in a nutshell, our obligations are very few. We don't have to pay taxes to the central government. Name me one system in the world. There are a lot of autonomous regions, apart from Quebec, Puerto Rico, Scotland, a lot of them. Everyone has an obligation to the central system. We don't have to pay tax to the Beijing government at all. We don't have to pay for the PRA garrison. We used to have to pay a hell of a lot for the British garrison. Right? We don't have to pay anything. Why? Because we are the privileged son. Why are we the privileged son? Because our elect know Taiwan. Right? They are prepared to give you as much as they can give you to Yun Sing. That's sincere. That's priority number one. And so to me, it's a tragedy. You have a father who wants to give the son everything in order to get the other son to come back. And then we will get it.
其實咧，當我哋安排以基本法咁沉悶嘅話題我請咗啲社區領袖嚟、商界領袖嚟、各個團體嘅代表又有學生代表喺度，又有咁多位律師喺度，諗住個個都會聽到好悶啊，死啦！想唔到胡律師將呢個咁沉悶嘅法律嘅問題講得咁生動。Let's give a round of applause to